It was a bitterly cold night in Hull, East Yorkshire. January 31st, 2019. A 21-year-old student disappeared from one of the city's busiest streets. No one heard a scream. No one saw where she went. In under a minute, Libby Anna Squire was gone. What followed was the largest missing persons investigation in Humberside police history. But behind the search was something deeper, something darker. A story of overlooked offenses, a history of silent crimes, and a man whose disturbing behavior had gone unnoticed for years. This is not just the case of a student who never made it home. It's a case that reveals the hidden danger in everyday places. A case that forces questions about how justice responds to warning signs, and what happens when those signs are ignored. As investigators worked to piece together her final movements, they uncovered a pattern. Voyeurism, indecent exposure, targeted intrusions, all pointing to a predator who had been watching, waiting, and escalating. And at the heart of it all, a mother's quiet determination to make sure her daughter's death would not be in vain. This is the real story of Libby Squire, the night she vanished and everything that followed. Welcome to the Crime Series, where we bring you real stories that matter. If you care about justice, truth, and powerful storytelling, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And as always, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. In the heart of East Yorkshire lies Hull, a port city shaped by working-class resilience and a growing student population. Among its thousands of young residents was 21-year-old Libby Anna Squire, known simply as Libby. Libby was born in July 1997 and raised in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire. She was the eldest of 4 children in a stable, loving family. Libby Anna Squire, Libby to everyone who knew her, was by all accounts the kind of young woman parents hoped to raise. Her upbringing was stable, warm, and encouraging. She was loved, taught to be kind. Her upbringing was shaped by structure, emotional warmth, and strong values. Her mother worked as a nurse, her father as an engineer. Together, they built a home rooted in hard work, encouragement, and emotional security. From a young age, Libby showed signs of being intellectually gifted, but her personality remained grounded. She was introspective, thoughtful, and deeply sensitive to those around her. Academically, she excelled in school. Teachers saw in her a curious, reflective student with the potential to thrive in higher education. She was quiet but observant, often preferring books and music over loud social scenes. She played piano, wrote poetry, and engaged in philosophical thought even before entering university. Her parents recognized her potential early on and nurtured it without pressure. When Libby received her acceptance into the University of Hull, it was a moment of immense pride for her family. Though the university was far from home, her parents supported her decision without hesitation. They believed in her independence and trusted her maturity. For Libby, Hull represented more than just an academic pursuit. It was an opportunity for personal growth, a step into adulthood, and a space where she could explore her intellectual and emotional world with a sense of purpose. At university, she lived on Wellesley Avenue, a street filled with shared student housing. Hull's student districts, particularly areas around Beverly Road, were known for their accessibility and nightlife. Libby shared her accommodation with friends and maintained a structured lifestyle. She was in a long-distance relationship with a partner from home, a bond she maintained with loyalty despite the physical distance. Friends described her as emotionally intelligent and focused. She wasn't known for reckless behavior. Instead, she navigated university life with quiet responsibility, balancing academic rigor with the occasional night out. January 31st, 2019, was a Thursday, an ordinary student night by all appearances. Libby had plans to attend the Welly Club, a popular venue frequented by students. The weather was cold and damp, characteristic of a British winter. Libby had been drinking prior to the outing. When the group arrived at the club, security staff refused her entry due to her level of intoxication. Her friends, showing concern, arranged for a taxi to take her home. Just before midnight, CCTV footage confirmed Libby arriving outside her house on Wellesley Avenue. But instead of entering, she walked away into the night. The reasons remain unclear. Whether she was disoriented, unsettled, or distracted, no one knows for certain. What is certain is that she did not go inside. Instead, she made her way back onto Beverly Road. Shortly after midnight, several individuals saw her walking alone. She appeared upset, disoriented, and vulnerable. At 12:09 a.m., residential CCTV captured her near a bench along Beverly Road. This would be the final confirmed sighting of Libby Squire alive. When morning came and she had not returned, her housemates became concerned. Calls and messages went unanswered. Her absence was reported to the police. A missing person case was opened immediately, but within 24 hours it became evident this was no ordinary disappearance. The search effort escalated rapidly. Humberside police launched a full-scale operation involving more than 200 officers. They coordinated with local volunteers, university officials, and specialized search teams. Drones, helicopters, and sniffer dogs were deployed. Dive teams searched the river hull. Officers combed through nearby parks, underpasses, alleyways, and wooded areas. Flyers were distributed citywide bearing Libby's photograph and a growing sense of urgency. Despite the scale of the operation, Libby's trail went cold almost instantly. Her phone had been inactive since the night she disappeared. Her bank account showed no activity. Social media remained untouched. There were no personal belongings left behind, no signs of struggle, and no eyewitnesses who saw what happened next. Investigators reviewed hours of CCTV footage, trying to reconstruct her path. But after 12:09 a.m., she seemed to vanish completely. Libby's parents traveled to Hull to be close to the search. In private, they struggled with the sudden loss of control. Their daughter, who had once been a child in their arms, was now missing in a city miles away. The public image of the case began to grow. National media outlets picked up the story. Communities across the country followed updates closely. For many, Libby's case symbolized something larger: the fragility of safety in everyday life. Investigators soon began to suspect that foul play may have been involved. Surveillance footage of Libby walking alone didn't match the profile of someone simply running away. The absence of digital footprints and physical evidence raised red flags. Privately, authorities shifted the investigation's tone, from hopeful recovery to potential criminal act. As attention intensified, investigators also became aware of an individual who had been in the area around the time Libby disappeared. A man, later determined to have a disturbing criminal history, had been spotted on CCTV driving near Beverly Road in a silver vehicle. His presence at multiple points along Libby's last known route raised questions. He had no connection to her, but his timing, behavior, and later discovered background would soon become critical to the case. Still, at that point in early February, Libby remained missing. Hull's streets were plastered with her photo. Search efforts continued, but leads were scarce. Public interest remained high, yet each new day brought fewer answers. Libby Squire's disappearance had now become one of the most high-profile cases in the region. What began as a night out among friends had unraveled into a national crisis. A daughter was missing, a family was breaking, a city was holding its breath, and somewhere, hidden in plain sight, a predator had already made his move. This was no longer just a missing person case. It was the beginning of a far darker story, one that had only just begun to surface. In the next 48 hours after Libby Squire vanished, investigators proceeded in standard procedure. They continued by establishing a timeline and interviewing those closest to her. Her housemates, still processing the shock, were among the first questioned. They described the events of the night in detail: how they had planned a night out, how Libby had been drinking, and how she was refused entry at the Welly Club. They confirmed arranging a taxi to take her home and watched her leave in it, believing the night was over. Investigators also spoke to Libby's long-distance boyfriend. He was cooperative and distraught. He had maintained regular communication with her before her disappearance. Their relationship, though physically distant, was emotionally strong. There were no signs of conflict or distress in their recent conversations. Police examined messages, call logs, and digital activity. Everything pointed toward a stable, loving relationship, one that made her sudden disappearance even more baffling. Libby's social media accounts, phone records, and financial activity were also scrutinized, but nothing emerged to suggest that she had planned to leave voluntarily or had been in contact with anyone unusual. Her routine remained consistent until the very moment she vanished. With no evidence of voluntary absence and no leads from her inner circle, investigators began widening the net. As the days passed and hope of finding Libby Squire alive began to fade, attention quietly turned to what lay beyond the reach of her immediate social world. What looked on the surface like a missing person case was quickly beginning to reveal itself as something far more sinister. Investigators pored over hours of CCTV footage. Amid the slow progress, one detail kept reappearing: a silver Vauxhall Astra. The car had been spotted multiple times on the night of January 31st, 2019, moving deliberately through the area, circling streets around Beverly Road. It was seen near Libby's last known location and vanished from camera view at a critical moment in the timeline. The vehicle was registered to 24-year-old Powell Relowich. Relowich lived nearby on Raglan Street. He was a husband and father of two, a factory worker at a meat processing plant. From the outside, he appeared unremarkable, just another working-class man in a modest neighborhood. But when investigators began digging into his past, a darker pattern emerged. Relowich had arrived in the UK from Poland in 2015. He kept a low profile, blending into the community with ease. But beneath the surface, he had developed a deeply disturbing pattern of criminal behavior, one that had gone unnoticed for years. He was a serial spy and sexual offender. Over the course of 2 years, he had committed a series of escalating crimes across Hull's student neighborhoods. He had watched women through their windows, followed them at night, and masturbated outside their homes. In multiple cases, he had broken into student accommodations, not to steal valuables, but to take underwear, sex toys, and deeply personal belongings. His offenses had gone largely unlinked and unsolved. Between 2017 and early 2019, reports of these incidents had trickled into local police stations. But without forensic evidence or witness identification, no suspect had been identified. No arrests were made. His pattern continued, hidden in the quiet hours of the night. As investigators cross-referenced Libby's case with his known movements, they saw that on the night she disappeared, his vehicle had followed a highly suspicious pattern. His silver Astra was seen driving near Beverly Road multiple times. It stopped in close proximity to where Libby had been seen just minutes before her last known sighting. Phone and GPS data later showed that both his mobile signal and vehicle tracking dropped out for approximately 30 minutes, exactly during the time window when Libby went missing. On February 6, 2019, 6 days after Libby's disappearance, Relowich was arrested, but not for Libby's case. At the time, there was still no body, no forensic link, and no confirmed crime scene. Instead, he was arrested for unrelated offenses uncovered during the investigation: spy, burglary, and public indecency. During a search of his home, police found stolen women's underwear, explicit photos, and other incriminating items taken from female victims. The volume and nature of the items suggested a long-standing pattern of predatory behavior. He was charged and held in custody. But still, there was no direct evidence linking him to Libby Squire. Publicly, her case remained open and unresolved. Behind the scenes, though, investigators were now convinced they had their prime suspect. If you found this story compelling and appreciate the way we bring real-life cases to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth and share these important stories. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. They continued building their timeline, analyzing surveillance footage, retracing every step, every minute, every camera angle. Hull remained on edge. A city that had once searched its parks and rivers in hope was now holding its breath in suspicion. The man in custody, now revealed to have preyed on the same neighborhoods for years, had been hiding in plain sight. The question now wasn't if he was connected, but how. 47 days had passed since Libby Squire disappeared from Beverly Road in Hull. 47 days of unanswered questions, fruitless searches, and deepening dread. And then on March 20th, 2019, a grim discovery changed everything. Near Spurn Point, where the Humber River empties into the North Sea, two fishermen spotted a body floating in the water. Emergency services responded quickly. What they recovered was the decomposed remains of a young woman, unrecognizable to the naked eye, damaged by weeks of exposure to the elements. Forensics were called in. DNA samples were taken. Dental records were checked. The next day, the results confirmed what many had feared, but few had spoken aloud. It was Liberty Anna Squire. For her family, the official identification marked the end of a limbo that had held them hostage since January. The hope they had clung to, however faint, was now gone. The photographs they had posted, the pleas they had made, the moments spent scanning every face on every street, all of it culminated in this: the discovery of their daughter's body, alone and lifeless, in the murky waters of the Humber. Behind the closed doors of the family's temporary accommodation in Hull, devastation set in. Friends, relatives, and support officers stood by as Lisa and Russ Squire received the news. There was no dramatic reaction, just the heavy silence of parents absorbing an unthinkable truth. The reality of what had happened had settled, finally in its cruelest form. Libby was not coming home. The case was no longer about a missing person. It was now a confirmed death. And with that confirmation, the tone of the investigation shifted. The post-mortem report followed quickly. Due to the body's condition, pathologists were unable to determine a precise cause of death. There were no signs of obvious trauma, no drowning markers, no fractured bones, no evidence of blunt force injuries. However, signs consistent with sexual activity and possible assault were noted. The conclusion was not definitive, but it raised serious suspicions. The limitations of the examination frustrated investigators, but it didn't deter them. Even without a clear cause of death, the investigative focus remained fixed. For weeks, they had been building a case around one individual, Powell Relowich. Relowich was already in custody, arrested 6 weeks earlier for a series of sexually motivated crimes uncovered during the search for Libby. At the time of his arrest, police had no forensic link connecting him directly to her disappearance. But now, with her body found, investigators revisited every detail: his movements, his digital footprint, his past offenses. Forensic experts re-examined his car, clothing, and home. They scoured his browsing history, GPS data, and interview transcripts. The gaps in his statements, the inconsistencies in his timeline, and his refusal to give a clear account of his actions that night pointed to guilt. A profile emerged, not of an impulsive offender, but of a man who had escalated his behavior over time, growing bolder with each offense. But beyond the investigation was a second story, one unfolding quietly inside the home of the accused. Relowich's family, like many others in the Hull community, had been following the news of Libby Squire's disappearance. They had no idea that the man arrested in connection to sex crimes and now suspected in a potential murder was their own. Relowich lived in a modest home on Raglan Street, married with children, a family man, a father who walked his kids to school, a husband who went to work and returned on time. When news broke that he had been arrested initially, his family was shocked. Initial reports linked him only to being a spy and burglary, crimes disturbing in nature, but thought that after some time, he would be released to them, but now linked to Libby's sudden disappearance, and now confirmed to be a sexual predator and a killer, was more devastating and unbelieving. His wife remained mostly silent, offering no public statements. Family members in Poland were informed discreetly. Behind the scenes, confusion and disbelief took hold. No one in his immediate circle had suspected anything of this magnitude. There were no signs, no warnings. Those closest to him expressed shock, but not defense. There were no televised pleas of innocence, no campaigns proclaiming his character. If they were in denial, they remained private about it. If they believed the evidence, they said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Libby's parents had retreated from public view. After the formal identification of her body, they withdrew from media appearances. What began as a desperate, visible search for their daughter had now become a period of private mourning. Supporters, friends, and even strangers sent condolences from across the country. Hull, once a city buzzing with posters and search parties, now carried a different atmosphere, one of grief, tempered by rage. The police proceeded carefully. On October 24, 2019, 8 months after Libby disappeared, Powell Relowich was formally charged with sexual assaults and homicide. The charges were based not on a confession or forensic smoking gun, but on a mountain of circumstantial and behavioral evidence. His history, his lies, his proximity, his silence. The announcement drew national attention. For months, Libby's case had been a symbol of vulnerability, of violence, of the unknown. Now it had a name, a face. A man who had lurked in shadows and hunted in silence. By January 2021, the case that had haunted the city of Hull for 2 years was heading to court. The suspect, Powell Relowich, now faced charges not just for a string of prior sexual offenses, but for the sexual assaults and homicide of 21-year-old Libby Squire. The trial would unfold over several tense weeks at Sheffield Crown Court, offering the first full account of what had happened on the night of January 31, 2019, and who was responsible. The evidence was substantial, though not without challenges. The central difficulty remained the absence of a definitive cause of death. Libby's body, recovered from the Humber estuary after nearly 7 weeks in water, had been too decomposed to determine how she died. No forensic evidence directly tied Relowich to the scene of her death. There was no eyewitness. But what the prosecution had was a web of circumstantial evidence and a pattern of deeply disturbing behavior. The case opened with a precise reconstruction of Libby's final hours. She had been out with friends, turned away from the Welly Club for being too intoxicated. Witnesses later saw her distressed and stumbling along Beverly Road. She was alone, vulnerable, and disoriented. What made her even more susceptible was a lesser-known fact that emerged during the trial. Libby occasionally experienced memory blackouts when highly intoxicated. It had happened before. That night, it may have happened again. Powell Relowich was prowling the same streets at that exact time. His behavior that evening fit the escalating pattern he had followed for years. In prior incidents, he had stalked women, exposed himself, and stolen underwear and sex toys during break-ins. These incidents had gone largely undetected until the investigation into Libby's disappearance brought them to light. But this time, his actions had crossed a line. According to his own statement, given during police interrogation and later in court, Relowich admitted to approaching Libby in his car. He claimed she was crying and incoherent. He said he stopped and offered her help. He also admitted that he found her sexually attractive and described himself as having a very high sex drive, which, he argued, explained why he frequently acted on sexual impulses. That night, he said, was no different. He claimed that, after a brief conversation, Libby got into his car voluntarily. He drove her to Oak Road playing fields, a dark, isolated area not far from the city center. There, he said, they engaged in sexual activity. He insisted the encounter was consensual. Afterwards, he claimed that Libby became upset again. According to his version of events, she was disoriented and crying, so he left her in the field alone and drove away. He gave no clear explanation for why he didn't take her home, call for help, or inform police. He said he panicked due to his previous crimes and didn't want to be blamed if something happened. The prosecution dismantled his version of events. Libby, they argued, was incapable of consenting to anything that night. Her blood alcohol level, her behavior on CCTV, and witness accounts all confirmed she was heavily intoxicated, physically unsteady, and emotionally distressed. She had already fallen multiple times before even reaching the bench where she was last seen. In that condition, meaningful consent was legally and ethically impossible. 2 additional women came forward during the investigation, further undermining Relowich's claims of innocence. Both testified that he had approached them earlier that same night on the very same stretch of road and made unsolicited sexual advances. They declined. One said he made her feel uneasy. The other said he appeared to be cruising, looking for someone vulnerable. These interactions were brief but significant. They placed him in the same area with the same intent, moments before he encountered Libby. The prosecution presented this as evidence of predatory behavior, not a one-off incident, but part of a deliberate pattern. They argued that Relowich, driven by sexual compulsion and emboldened by years of unpunished offending, was actively hunting that night. When he saw Libby, intoxicated, alone, and visibly distressed, he acted on instinct. Relowich's own timeline collapsed under scrutiny. CCTV showed his silver Astra circling Beverly Road around 12:11 a.m., just minutes after Libby was last seen. His phone signal and vehicle tracker disappeared for almost half an hour, returning shortly after 12:40 a.m. in a different part of town. Prosecutors argued that this was the precise window during which he abducted, assaulted, and disposed of Libby. His explanations varied. At different times he claimed he was driving aimlessly. At others, he said he was trying to clear his head. His accounts contradicted not only the timeline, but each other. He admitted to deleting data from his phone, switching off location services, and discarding items. He never contacted emergency services. He never checked if Libby was safe. His actions, the Crown argued, were not those of a helpful stranger, but of a man covering his tracks. The defense attempted to portray him as panicked and sexually impulsive, but not violent. They insisted the sex was consensual, that Libby was capable of understanding what was happening, and that Relowich bore no responsibility for what happened after she walked away. But the jury saw otherwise. Over the course of the 4-week trial, the court heard from more than 30 witnesses. This included police officers, forensic experts, digital analysts, and civilians. Libby's friends described her intoxication. Experts explained the legal definition of consent. Investigators outlined how Relowich had lied repeatedly during interviews. The final blow came in the form of his criminal history. Although the jury wasn't told every detail, they were made aware of his past sexual offenses, those same burglaries, indecent exposures, and stalking incidents that he had committed over months, if not years. On February 11, 2021, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of sexual assault. Guilty of homicide. Powell Relowich was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. The courtroom was silent. Libby's parents, seated quietly among family and officers, received the news with composed anguish. Justice had been served, but justice does not restore what has been lost. Outside the court, prosecutors and police offered statements thanking the family for their strength and the public for their support. There was no celebration, just relief. After 2 years of confusion, fear, and unanswered questions, there was now clarity. After Powell Relowich was sentenced to life imprisonment for the sexual assaults and homicide of Libby Squire, the legal chapter closed, but another began. For Libby's mother, Lisa Squire, justice wasn't enough. She had followed the trial closely, heard every detail of how her daughter was targeted, assaulted, and left to die. What struck her most wasn't just what Relowich did, but how many signs were missed along the way. Before Libby's murder, Relowich had committed multiple non-contact sexual offenses across Hull, being a soy, public indecency, and burglaries where he stole intimate items from women's homes. At least 10 such offenses had been reported to police between 2017 and early 2019. But these crimes were treated as low-level and never connected. No one realized a predator was escalating until it was too late. Lisa Squire began to speak publicly, highlighting how those early offenses were red flags. She didn't frame them as isolated incidents, but as part of a pattern that the system failed to interrupt. Her message was direct. If those reports had been investigated thoroughly, her daughter might still be alive. She campaigned for the police and courts to treat non-contact sexual offenses more seriously, arguing they are often precursors to more violent crimes. She emphasized the need for better tracking of repeat offenders, stronger data sharing between police forces, and earlier intervention. Her voice resonated. Survivors across the country began sharing stories of being ignored or dismissed when reporting stalking, flashing, or harassment. Libby's case gave weight to their experiences. Lisa also advocated for a cultural shift in how sexual offenses are perceived, challenging the idea that some crimes are minor. She worked with charities, supported police training initiatives, and helped raise awareness around consent and early signs of predatory behavior. In parallel, institutions began to respond. Some police forces reviewed how they logged indecent exposure and spies. National conversations emerged around women's safety and the need for more preventative strategies. Lisa remained composed and focused, never seeking attention for herself. Her campaign wasn't emotional, it was practical. She spoke from a place of evidence and experience, using her daughter's case to push for reforms that could save others. Libby Squire's story became more than a case file. Through her mother's efforts, it became a symbol of why early warning signs matter and what happens when they are ignored. Lisa's work continues, not in protest, but in policy. Not in anger, but in persistence. And in doing so, she ensures Libby's legacy is one of change, not just tragedy. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime documentaries and fictional stories inspired by true events. We uncover the darkest corners of human nature, so you can be more aware, more informed, and maybe even safer. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something just isn't right.